be available online. So without further ado, let's get to the problem, directly to the problem, talking about bumblebee species decline. So what do we know? We know that bumblebee species are indeed in decline based on data we've collected from across Massachusetts. Currently, what I'm showing here is some graphs showing bumblebee abundance based on species. There are currently 11 historically found species of bumblebees in Massachusetts. And as far as current data is shown, we've only been able to find regularly about half of those species. So this is a pretty serious problem for bumblebees in the state. The historical data has been collected from 1900 to 1990, and the current data has been collected by an ecologist on our team from 2015 to 2017. And even just looking at some of the data here, I mean, for Bombus affinis, it was found much more abundantly in historical data, and we haven't been able to find any sort of logs of that species currently in the state, which is a real serious problem. And this information definitely shows that we're experiencing a downward trend. That's also one of the reasons why we decided to look at bumblebees overall. Bumblebees, if we look at the native pollinators in North America and in Massachusetts, we know that they're actually a relatively small group of pollinators within the state. There are around 50 species of bumblebees in North America, when compared to 1,200 species of butterflies or 11,000 species of moths. So while all of these species are involved in the pollination of our wild flowers and plants within our ecosystems, so we just want to take a step back and realize that these other pollinators are also very important. And as the Beecology project continues to expand, we would love to get more information about each of these other species and how they have an impact. But as far as current data is shown, we know that bumblebee species are in decline. We have data that shows that, and it's easier to log information about bumblebees in order to keep track of them. The other distinction I wanted to make here is that a lot of media coverage has been focused on managed pollinators decline. So when you hear about colony collapse disorder, it's referring to honeybees. But the kind of pollinator decline we're going to be talking about today is completely different from that. There's only one species of honeybee in North America. They were brought over from Europe. They're non-native. And they were brought over for agricultural purposes. They're pollinating food crops. But when dealing with managed pollinator decline, we have to look at more of abundance of the species. And humans can have a larger control over the number of honeybees that are in the state. Whereas for native pollinators, we're looking at species that are already that are distributed throughout the state, and it's much harder to control. They control their own population sizes. So here's actually a closer look at the bumblebee species that are found in Massachusetts. As you can see, there's more than just one species. It's the 11 that we find here. And they all look very different. They have different kinds of colorations on their heads, thoraxes, and abdomens. And we're actually going to use this to our advantage. When we ask citizen scientists to go out and log information about bumblebees, the way we'll identify them is based on their coloration patterns that differ. And when we're bringing it back to bumblebees, unlike managed bees that have their populations controlled by humans, in order to understand how important bumblebees are in local wild ecosystems, we have to understand how they control their own populations. And to do that, we need to know about the bumblebee life cycle. So around this time of year in February, when it's a little warmer today in February, but in the winter, bumblebee queens will be hibernating underground in what we call overwintering sites. When the weather starts to get a little bit warmer during the spring, the bumblebees queens will wake up, and after being underground all winter, they'll want to get food. So it'll be in time with the flowers that they want to collect nectar and pollen from. They collect nectar for carbohydrates and protein from pollen. So each of those resources from flowers is used for food for bumblebees. It's during this time that bumblebee queens will be looking for nest sites. So once they do find that nest site, it's important because then the queen will stay there for the rest of the season, and will lay eggs for the new set of worker bees that will continue that process throughout the summer. The nest location is important because it needs to be near enough flowers in order to support the colony. So the colony prospers over the summer, collecting pollen and nectar in order to save up for times during the fall when there might not be as many of those resources around. It's at that time when the queen will mate with male bumblebees, produce the next generation of queens, and towards the very end of the season, the new generation of queens will disperse, find new overwintering sites, and come the first frost, all of the rest of the colony will die. So this cycle ends up repeating over and over each year. And an important distinction to make is that for each of these bumblebee species in Massachusetts, this cycle may happen at a different time throughout the year. So if we look at it from the perspective of the flowers, if they're relying on 2 different species to pollinate them throughout different parts of the season, a drop in one of those species will definitely hurt the flower populations. So that'll bring us to the actual relationship between bumblebees and flowers. It's a very strong relationship. There's a lot of coevolution that's happened with this relationship. And so I'll just go into that a little bit of detail in order to understand how it has an impact on our ecosystem. As we know, bumblebees do collect all of their resources, pollen and nectar, from flowers. Their memory is important for this process as well, because in order for bumblebees to be the most efficient when they're out foraging, they need to remember the species of flowers that give them the greatest reward. Because the more resources they can bring back to the colony, the greater colony success and more bumblebees will be produced. So there will be a stable bumblebee population. Now the flowers don't get the short end of the stick either. The flowers, because they can't get up and find their own mates, they need the help of pollinators for reproduction. So in order for flowers, in order for them to reproduce, they do need the help of these different bumblebee species. And they're incentivized for correct pollen transfer. So what that means is that they want to give, in order for pollination to take place and reproduction for flowers to take place, a bumblebee needs to fly from flower to flower within the same species, right? Because pollen from one species to the same species will be successful. Whereas if the bee maybe loses a little bit of memory and can't remember what flowers give the greatest reward, if it flies with pollen from one species to another species, pollination won't take place. It's a waste of pollen. So it incentivizes flowers to give the greatest reward to bumblebees in order for their own populations to do well. A little bit more on that is actually the extent to which this happens is pretty complex too. Not only are bumblebees choosing flowers based on the amount of the reward, but they're also choosing it based on physical constraints. So different bumblebees actually have different tongue lengths, right, in order to access different nectar tubes within different flowers. So the longer-tongued bumblebees may be able to reach further inside these longer tubed flowers, whereas the short-tongued bumblebees may have to go onto more of the flat flowers. And as we can see from some of the information here, it's actually what we have on the left here is for preferences in bumblebees for nectar foraging. So we have a lot of different kinds of plants over here and the bumblebee species in Massachusetts. They actually divided it up into the 2 on the left here are the short-tongued bumblebees, the 3 in the middle are the medium-tongued bumblebees, and the 4 on the right here are the long-tongued bumblebees. And as you can see, each of that trend follows. So, you know, the goldenrods are highly pollinated by these short-tongued bumblebees. So even though if there is an area with goldenrods and both short and long-tongued bumblebees, if the short-tongued bumblebee dies out, the goldenrod won't be able to be pollinated. The same thing goes for pollen foraging for bumblebees. They have preferences based on how much resources they're getting and how much and their own biological constraints. So now that we know the relationship between bumblebees and flowers is this important, we need to look at it on the overall scale within an ecosystem. Because these wildflowers have an even greater effect on other wildlife within the ecosystem. If you think of a food chain, the producers that produce they collect all of their energy from the sun and they produce their own food, are then eaten by herbivores, which are then eaten by carnivores. So we call bumblebees, because they have such a keystone role on these flowering plant species, they're called a keystone species. So any drops in bumblebee diversity or population will greatly affect all of the wildlife throughout Massachusetts. So it really is important that we maintain both wild bumblebee abundance and diversity. So now that we know a little bit more about the problem, let's try and find out why. There are a lot of different proposed causes for bumblebee decline. These include climate change. So changes in temperature may affect the plants that bumblebees pollinate, and they might not be able to get food in areas they would have in the past. New pathogens or diseases are killing off bumblebee species. Invasive species. So if a non-native plant outcompetes a bumblebee's food source, the species number will go down. Or same thing with other pollinators. If an invasive pollinator species outcompetes these bumblebees, that'll be a problem too. We have loss in habitat. So from areas of larger amounts of industrial agriculture or deforestation, or even partly due to climate change, a loss in habitat for bumblebees can greatly affect how many there are. And finally, there's the issue of pesticides, because there's data to show that pesticides have a severe impact on bumblebee memory, which when we were looking at the relationship between pollinators and flowers, bumblebee memory is important in maintaining flower populations and making sure that bumblebees are collecting the most amount of resources that they can. And we actually have a model that we'll describe later on in the presentation today to talk more about the effects of bumblebees not having as much memory due to pesticides over multiple generations. And so the reason that these are all proposed causes is that we don't know to what extent each of these factors has on each individual bumblebee species. And that's the kind of information that we're trying to get out of the Beecology project. So I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Sam, and he's going to talk about some of the goals and solutions that the Beecology project will accomplish.
Hey guys. So the problem that we're facing is that we don't really understand the basic ecological needs and the behavior patterns required to develop these solutions. So in order to do that, we need to start collecting information about this through the Beecology mobile application that we've just begun to talk about. So the solution is that we're trying to crowdsource data from you, such as bumblebee flower interactions and the diversity of bumblebee species throughout the state. And we're doing that through our mobile application. So we have two phases to our project. Phase one is collecting this information. So that involves you, the user, collecting it, bringing it in, we send it to the database, and we can start analyzing it. Phase two, once we understand these different factors, the smaller factors such as like the flower interactions and species preferences, we can start looking at some of the later on steps in the bumblebee life cycle, like nesting and overwinter site preferences. So once we get that and we really have a grasp on a possible solution to these critical questions and issues facing these pollinators, we can start looking longer term and much more broader in scope. So instead of just looking at Massachusetts, we'll look at other New England states. We'll start to look at moths, butterflies, and other pollinators, and start to look at regions other than possibly North America. So So this is this is the system as a whole. So the first step of the system involves collecting information on bumblebee species interactions through the app, which you'll see a demonstration of in a moment. Once you've collected that, you submit it to our database, the central database here. And then with that information, we begin to visualize it and start to look at, we can start to create these visualizations where we can look at species differences and diversity based on the Simpsons index. And it really requires you. So the next step we're going to look at is we're going to have to look at the app and see how this process actually involves you. And to do that, my colleague Kenneth is going to give you a demonstration of the Android application.
Hold on one second. Technical difficulties. Okay. So the mobile app is your tool for contributing to the Beecology project. You'll be able to log and identify bumblebees you find in the wild and submit your data to our project. So today I'm going to show you the Android app, but there will soon be an iOS version, and the steps will be exactly the same as what I'm showing you here. So there won't be any need to convert. We also have tutorial videos on our Facebook page that'll go into more detail than what I'm doing now. So when you start our app, you'll be given several options for logging a new bee. You can take a picture or video directly. If you have a picture you've already taken, you can import that. And if you're an expert and you know how to identify the bee, you can choose that, and that'll skip our guided process. So we recommend taking a video for two reasons. One, it can be very difficult to get a clear shot the first time just by taking a picture. And two, our editing tools allow you to cut down the video and find a frame that's as clear as possible. So I'm going to start with that. So we don't have live bees present. So we have a model here just to show you an example of what you'll be dealing with in the wild. So the bee will be moving around. You'll be trying to get a good angle here. You want to stay about 6 inches to a foot away from the bee, and you want to be at about a 45-degree angle. You want to look and try and get the color patterns on the head, thorax, and abdomen and be able to clearly see those features. So being too low or being too high is not going to allow you to see that. So before we jump into editing, I'm going to switch over and just show you some examples of what good and bad shots are. Which one?
No.
So you're not necessarily looking for objective quality. The shots on the left are very blurry and distorted, but you can see the color patterns. You can see the head, the thorax, the abdomen very clearly. The shots on the right, while they're very high quality, probably more than you get with an Android app, you're not able to see those color patterns. So these shots on the left here is what you're trying to achieve. So when we go back into our editing tools, you'll be able to adjust the speed of the video and play it back. Once you've found a frame that looks good, you'll be able to zoom in directly on the image and then hit capture frame. So we'll ask you to confirm the date and location. We collect this data so that we're able to determine where you found the bee, and we can plot this data and get a better picture of diversity and abundance in the state. And then you'll be directed to our guided ID process. So we provided a few diagrams on the bottom here, and you want to match those up with the picture of the bee you've just taken. Once you've selected a thorax pattern, once you've selected an abdomen pattern, you'll be given a side-by-side view so you can much easier identify which options you're selecting. This is where having a clear shot becomes most important. Once you think you've identified your bee, we'll give you a species and we'll provide an image of that bee in the wild. You can compare that to the bee that you've identified and either continue to flower or attempt to redo it. So we're going to ask that you provide a flower name. So the more specific you can be here, the better. But we're just looking for a general, we're just looking for some information here about if your bee was on a flower, if you can provide that. For flower shape, we've provided a few graphics. So if you can identify the shape of the flower and then the color. And then for bee behavior, we have several videos that will go into more detail. But just briefly on bee behavior, you'll either see it collecting pollen or collecting nectar. So if it's collecting nectar, you'll see it sitting in the middle of the flower and it'll be extending its tongue, or it'll be moving very slowly and stuck in that center. If it's collecting pollen, it'll be rapidly moving around the edge of the flower. And you'll see some vibration. You may hear a distinct noise if it's doing that. So then once you've collected all this information, you can save it locally to your device. When you click Save Log, that's on your device. You don't need an internet connection. If you're out in the field and you don't have one, don't worry about it. However, be aware that once you do come back to somewhere with an internet connection, you do want to submit that log. So from your My Logs screen, you can select the log. You can view it and choose the logs you want to submit. All right. So I think that might be something with my device. But that's the process. So I'm just going to jump into what we're doing with this data and how we can make the best use of it. So in order to understand the data that we're collecting, we've created this visualization to highlight species diversity and abundance. This is where your data is going. This is the sort of So what you're looking at here is a very zoomed in map of Massachusetts with regions of data collected on bee diversity. So this data was collected in July of 2017, and each square on the map represents a particular set of data for that region. So the colors represent diversity metrics. So blue is low, red is high. And when we say diversity, we don't necessarily just mean the number of species, but also the population found of each species. So it's not good to have several species with all low population or to have one species with a very high population. So if you look at the bar graphs on the bottom, that's what we're showing is a low diversity area with one single species, and then the different colored regions showing multiple species, and the size of it representing the relative population of each species. So if we take this data and we zoom out, you can see we get a better picture of the data we currently have, and we're missing a lot. So we don't, based on this data, we can't get a conclusive picture of the factors that affect diversity, the factors that affect abundance, and we're looking to fill in those holes, and we need your help to do so. If we take a look at population data for each species, so this is just considering population and not diversity, and each circle on these maps represents the relative number of those species found in each region. So it's showing the same picture. So we don't know enough to conclude about the factors that we previously talked about. And the data that you'll collect with the mobile app is going to allow us to come to these conclusions. And you'll be able to eventually see these visualizations yourself on our site.
Excellent. Thank you, Kenneth. So one of the other things that we're going to have available on our site are some videos talking about or showing the effects of certain factors impacting bumblebee populations through a model. So I mentioned earlier about the fact that bumblebee memory was an important aspect of colony success, and the fact that having a sound memory allows for bumblebee populations to succeed because they're able to pollinate flowers correctly, have more instances of correct pollen transfer, and they're able to produce more nectar for their colony as well. So we've actually created another tool that you'll be able to have access to on the website that's called the Beecology web model. So this is actually a running version of the model right now, and I'm going to run it for you guys just so you can see what it looks like. And it's based off of real biology. So it's the bees within this model are flying around the map. They come back to the colony with nectar that they've collected from each of the flowers. As far as the flower types are concerned, each of the colors gives back a certain reward. So there are some flowers that are more rewarding than others. And then as the bees go through collecting all of their resources, we also programmed in the correct pollen transfer. So for each bee or for each flower that a bee visits, if it goes between two of the same species, then pollen transfer is successful. So this tool can be very powerful because what we can change is the aspects when it comes to bumblebee memory. So right now, each of the bees that are yellow have an unimpacted memory, but I'm going to show you, based on the slides, what happens after 4 generations of hives, what might happen to bumblebee populations that have an impacted memory where they're visiting flowers randomly and there's less correct pollen transfer. So what you can see based on the images that I have here for normal memory, both images for normal and impaired start off about the same. They have 4 bumblebees. And actually in this image, you can see that an impacted memory would have a white bumblebee, just to show the difference. But for normal memory, you can see that the 2 most rewarding species, the purple and white flowers, are the ones that end up dominating the map. The number of flowers is increasing. The number of bees definitely increases from around 4 to just over 20 in this small model. But then when you look at the comparison, it's pretty clear when you're looking at impaired memory. Because all of these bumblebees are going around randomly pollinating flowers, there's less success in the flower populations in the subsequent generations. So by the time you get to generation 4, there just aren't that many flowers around and there aren't enough bumblebees to really pollinate them. And while this is a closed model, so it doesn't take into account the emigration or immigration of either flower or bumblebee species, it's still a pretty strong indicator that bumblebee memory does have a strong impact on both species survival. And if a pesticide is impacting bumblebee memory, even though it isn't outright lethal, the effects that it has over generations of bumblebees can be definitely detrimental. So this is actually one of the tools. We'll have a bunch of videos on the website that show different scenarios of the model running, so that you can see the different scenarios we can test. And I'm actually going to pass it off to Sam to talk about some more of the future tools that we're going to have in the spring of 2018 for you to use and get involved with the project.
So here you can see a mock-up of our current website design. So the first thing that the website's going to host is it's going to have the download for both that Android application as well as our future iPhone application. There we'll also be hosting the visualization tools, as Kenneth demonstrated, from the diversity index to the total population sizes, things like that. The model will be available on the website. And it's important to note that even if you're not going to use our mobile application to submit to the logs, there are still other ways to contribute to the project. So since our website will be hosting the visualization tools in the model, say, for instance, a gardener wanted to learn more about the flowers they needed to plant, they could go to our site and learn more about that kind of stuff. Finally, my colleague Owen has created a Beecologist scoring system. So that's going to increase your involvement with the project. It's going to reward you for finding different types of bees and submitting successful logs. And it's going to kind of add a fun feature to the application to hopefully increase your enjoyment of using. The instructional videos will be hosted on there, as well as YouTube, and eventually this seminar is recorded and will be posted on there as well. And if you'd like to donate to our project, that will also be on the website. Check out our Facebook page for updates and other things like that, such as other events. And so on that note, that's the end of our Beecology Be the Change webinar. Like I said, this is for our IQP, so please take a minute to fill out the survey if you can. We really would appreciate that feedback. Thank you for watching. We're now going to take several minutes to answer any questions you have in the chat, so please feel free to ask us anything you would like. Thank you.
Great. I'm going to turn the video back on just so we'll be able to see all of you, or you'll be able to see all of us. I'm also going to post in the chat again the link to the tiny URL for the survey. We do have a question. So are we only looking for bee information in Massachusetts? Currently, we are looking for bee information in Massachusetts. We also have Dr. Jagir with us.
Yeah, let me field that. So, we're focused, the app is focused on bee species in Massachusetts. So as you go farther north, you may see other species, but certainly, the database is equipped to accept information from other states. So feel free to participate. If you see, as they were going through the app, if you find a bumblebee that doesn't match up, you can log it as unknown, and then as long as the picture is good quality, as Ken was describing, then I can ID it, even if it's not a part of the app and it's one of these other species. So the short answer is yes, we are collecting data from other areas.
Excellent. We have a question for, will you be notifying us when the iPhone app is available?
Yeah, so all of the, everything, so we created the team created the Facebook page so that we could sort of centralize everything. So everything, if you turn on your notifications, as soon as everything's ready, it'll be posted on the Facebook page. That includes the iPhone web app, which should be ready in the next few weeks. And as Ken mentioned, it's going to be identical to the Android app. So all of the tutorial videos apply. And then when the main site goes up with the visualization tools, all of that is coming into place, and all of that we're going to post on the Facebook page when it's ready. Yeah.
We have another question about how does the app control for multiple sightings of the same bee or bees?
As you're going through and looking at bees, if you're taking a picture and you sort of move away, we're assuming that it's a different bee. When we do this formally, we mark the bees so we can try to keep track of population size and also whether we minimize the chance of relogging the same bee. But as long as you go into an area and you're moving through it, odds are you're going to be spotting different bees. Does that answer your question?
Excellent. The other question that we had was about whether or not, or how people can get current access to the Android app. We are working on, if you go to the Facebook group page, so it's the Beecology Project group, there will be a post on the Beecology Project that has the app on the Facebook page. But as we are currently working on through the web page, we'll have a link to download the Android app.
I'm looking forward to it as well.
Definitely.
Yeah, so the Western Mass seems to be the hotspot for bee diversity. So we really want more data from Western Mass. I mean, East as well, because it's really low diversity, and we're trying to figure out what the difference is. The contacts that I have in Western Mass right now have really helped get this project going, and to see that there are species in the state that we thought were, or the Mass Fish and Wildlife thought were actually gone. They're actually alive and well in certain areas in Western Mass. So we're really excited to expand. And as it says on the slide, I'd be happy to come out and give talks and workshops on how to use the app. Also management, so land management strategies. So working with Franklin Land Trust, we got a grant and we've rehabilitated, well, not rehabilitated, but we've added some plants that will increase bumblebee diversity, and we're going to look at how that has impacted bee diversity over the next couple of years. So I'll be out there giving a workshop. So yeah, sorry for rambling on, but.
We have another.
So to answer that last question, oh, Jenny, how's it going? So if you see multiple bees, get a sense of how many that you see, and then you need to log each one of them. So take a look. If you see 5 impatiens, then log all 5 separately. And so you can go through and you'll take 5 separate pictures, and in your log, you'll have 5 separate entries. The expert log function, for those of you that feel comfortable with your bumblebee species, you don't have to take a picture. So it's, as I move through different places, I can quickly log and get it into the database without having to go through the picture process. So I would say that that's how you can do multiple bees.
Excellent. Do you have any other final questions? Well, we did get one actually from through email, actually, talking about whether or not, if you end up accidentally submitting the wrong species in an entry. So if you log a bumblebee, you end up matching it with a species, and you accidentally log it in. What would happen in that?
Right. So I'll be vetting the entries to make sure that it's the correct species. And so when you go to submit to the database the first time, it's going to ask you for your email. And so the reason for that is so that you can look at how you've contributed to the project. So you'll be able to pull your sightings up on the map and see where your sightings are relative to other people's sightings. And so if you are incorrectly identifying bees on a regular basis, then I have a way to contact you, and we can sort of work through the ID process. So I will be going through the pictures to make sure that, especially with the rare species, to make sure that the ID is correct.
Excellent. Well, the other thing that I wanted to reiterate was that this webinar will also be posted on the Facebook page, on our YouTube page, so that if you did want to reference this later on, if you wanted to attend the webinar and couldn't today, you'll have access to this as a resource.
Yeah. So to answer the question, so if we were to do this formally, I would say that when we do the formal surveys, we do once a week. And if you have a larger garden, you can go out once a week and thoroughly sample your garden. If you're in a larger area, so you have conservation lands, I would say to walk transects once a week. So I'd say once a week is the optimal. The key is that you do it through the summer. So the different bumblebees are, as Owen mentioned, they have different cycles. They peak at different times. What we're noticing is that compared to historical data, the peaks are changing. That suggests that there's something late fall, and most of the species that are in decline and threatened in Massachusetts peaked in late summer, early fall. All of them are currently in decline and threatened, including Bombus affinis that's on the endangered species list, except for Bombus impatiens. So by collecting every week, we were able to notice this shift. And so the question is, what is shifting them? And so it could be environment, it could be a number of things. We're looking into that, but we wouldn't have that information if we weren't collecting weekly. So I'd say that weekly is the best from say June 1st or in May when the queens are out in full force through the first frost would be ideal. Obviously, it's have decent time commitment, but again, to get a good picture of what's going on in your area, that it's worth the investment. Certainly for nocturnal, like moths and things, light is definitely an issue. For the bumblebees, I don't think so. I mean, I don't have anything to suggest that light pollution. There are certainly other things that are far more important, like exotic species that we found can disrupt the competitive balance in bumblebees. And we think that that's an overlooked driver of decline. But certainly it's a possibility. I mean, I don't know what the causal link or the mechanism would be for decline. So I'd like to just first of all thank everybody for attending the webinar. It's great, and I just want to remind you about the videos that are available for all of this, the online resources that we currently have through Facebook. I posted the I give out a sheet with plant species recommendations for pollen and nectar plants. I believe that's on the Facebook page now, and if it's not, I'll put it up there. There's the bumblebee ID sheet that I give out during my talks, and I'll be putting up other information as we get closer to the spring when the queens start to fly.
Yes, thank you very much, everybody, for coming out to the presentation today. We really do appreciate it, and we appreciate your interest in learning about bumblebee species diversity and wanting to help out. I'm going to also actually repost the link, in case it got lost in the chat, to the survey. So if you have a couple of minutes before you leave, if you could fill out the survey for us, we'd definitely appreciate it for our project. Also, another section for if you do fill out the survey, you don't have to do it right now because we're posting this resource online. The link to the survey should be good, and it'll be available at the end of that video as it's shown on the slide here. So if you don't have any time right now, no worries. It'll be available indefinitely.
Yeah, so if you're watching this at a future point in time after this video has been posted on YouTube, we'd still love your feedback, so please let us know.
Any other last-minute questions for wrapping up the webinar? All right. Well, we're going to close it off. Thank you again for everybody for coming out today. We really appreciate you guys being here, and we wish you a happy weekend. Do you have any other things you wanted to mention, Dr. Jakir? Or
No, I'd like to thank the three of you for putting this together. It was a good job, and thank everybody again for coming, for attending.
Excellent.
So this is the new version of the app with the latest and greatest version of the app. So you'd want to download, you'd want to uninstall. So if you have the older version of the app, you want to uninstall that and then click on the link and reinstall this new one. So all of the tutorial videos and the demonstration today was with the new app and the new interface. So it'll be different. There are more, the video capture capabilities are much better in this version. So you can pinch to zoom in and out, and you can slow down. You can actually move the image around. So this version is much better and more stable than the previous version. So I would suggest to uninstall and then install this one.
And in the interim period, while we are working on making the app available on the website, if you go to the Beecology Facebook group, there will be a post right after this webinar that will include the section that will include the download for the app. So you can also reach it there.
And it will be in the Android store soon. We just have to do a final quality check.
All right.
Okay.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks a lot.
Sorry, technical difficulties. There we go.
So I've got what is the Beecology Facebook group? It's just the Beecology group, isn't it?
No, there's the Beecology project page.
Oh yeah, the Beecology project.
But we can't share files through that. So there's the Beecology Facebook group is just for
Yeah,
temporary
but
sharing.
it's called the Beecology project, though, right? That's where they can get all the stuff.
Yes.
If they go to the Facebook page, the group is a subsection of the Facebook page.
Right, but somebody just said, what is the Beecology Facebook group? But it's the whole thing is just the Beecology project, right? That's where they go?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Great.
All right, well, good. So are we offline now?
Not quite. Here we go. I'm gonna close the meeting and I'll reconnect something.